Hello everyone, hope all of you are safe and healthy. Welcome to IAS Baba's Rapid Revision Series for Prelims 2021. This is session 58 and day 80, and the topic we have is Basic Trends and Statistics of Indian Economy. Friends, with the intent of building the builders of nation, IAS Baba is coming up with a foundation course for 2022. It is an integrated program of prelims, mains and interview training, and unlike traditional classroom coaching, it consists of the mentorship from the subject-wise experts and the motivation and guidance from the UPSC toppers, and the value-added notes are also being provided, and it is an inclusive program of prelims and mains test series as well, and it is going to start on August 16th, and students can make the best use of it. Now, coming to the topics we are going to discuss, that is the WPI and CPI, the trendings thereof, and then the weightage of core industries in the IIP, then different types of bank accounts, then assets and liabilities of RBI, then different types of money, the M0, M1, M2 and M3, then the trends of trade and fiscal deficit, so how are they varying, then data on imports and the statistics on exports in India, then data on remittances to India, and trends on FDI and FPI. Now, coming to the first one, the WPI and CPI. Friends, all these things will be often in news, and we need not specifically find any news for that to be asked in UPSC. Now, coming to wholesale price index, it is based on the price prevailing in the wholesale market or price at which the bulk transactions are made. So, this is not a retail transaction, it is a bulk transaction. Then, coming to the components, the manufactured products, they form the 65% of this WPI. So, these are given the 65% weightage, and this is the highest. So, this is a point to be remembered. Then, primary articles, they form 20%. Friends, primary article means minerals, mines, ores, etc. Then, fuel and power, it consists of 15%, and this is the least one. So, these are the weightages given. Then coming to more facts, the WPI basket includes 697 commodities in total, and all of these are only goods and no services are included in WPI. Then whose prices are captured at the wholesale or producer level. So, these are captured at the producer level, not at the consumer level. So, once again another point to be remembered. Then it is measured by Ministry of Commerce and Industries with the base year as 2011 and 2012. So, the Ministry of Commerce and Industries, not the Ministry of Finance. Then the base year is 2011-12, not the 2004-5, which has been updated. Then under the new series of WPI, the weight of manufactured items has decreased to 64.2% from 64.9% in the old series. So, in the new update, the weightage for the manufactured products has been decreased. So, again a point to be noted. So, here instead of 64.9, we have taken 64.2. So, this one has to be noted. Then, similarly, the weight of fuel and power has decreased to 13.1% from 14.9%. So, even this has to be taken care. Then, on the other hand, the weight of primary items has increased to 22.6% from 20.1%. So, the weightage taken from the manufactured goods and the fuel and power has been added to the primary articles. Then, data on wholesale price index is available every week, while data on consumer price index is available every month. So, this has to be remembered, that is WPI data is published every week, while the CPI data is published every month. This comes with a lag of 1 month. Then WPI is calculated on all India basis, while CPI is calculated for specific centers in India, and then this is aggregated to an all India index. Yes friends, this wholesale price index is most probably common in almost all the places in India, but however this consumer price index, it depends on the agri commodities and other volatile products. So, that is why this is calculated for specific areas and then they are averaged. So, these are some of the facts regarding WPI. Now, coming to CPI. Friends, the consumer price index is based on the final prices of goods at the retail level. So, this is not at the producer level, it is at the retail level. Then CPI industrial workers, CPI urban non-manual employees, then CPI agricultural laborers and CPI rural workers. So, these were the 4 CPI indices that were calculated by India, but currently this CPI urban non-manual employees, it has been removed, and currently only 3 are remaining, that is the CPI industrial workers, then CPI agricultural laborers and CPI rural workers. Yes friends, the CPI industrial workers is the most important one, and almost all the departments, they take this data into consideration. But however, RBI, it takes CPI combined, that is the average of all the 3 things into consideration while fixing the repo rates and other things. Then WPI has a broad coverage compared to CPIs, and it covers larger number of non-agricultural products and tradable items, which are missing in CPI. Yes friends, we know that CPI, it includes both the trade in goods as well as services. So as it includes service as well, these non-agricultural goods that are included will be lesser in number. So that place will be taken by services. But however, this WPI, in that almost all the weightage is given to goods only, and that is why it includes most number of products, that is mainly the non-agricultural products. So in that sense, this WPI, it has a broader coverage. Then in India, RBI uses the CPI combined released by Central Statistical Organization CSO of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation for inflation purpose with the base year as 2012. So even the base year for CPI is also 2012. Then the number of items in CPI basket includes 448 in rural and 460 in urban areas. As we have spoken earlier, CPI is calculated for various areas and then they are averaged. So in rural, 448 commodities are taken into consideration. In urban, 460 are taken. Then CPI measure assigns nearly 36% of weightage on services and includes price changes in housing, education, healthcare, transport, communication, personal care and entertainment. So 36% of weightage is assigned to the service sector, a point to be noted. So here also the maximum weightage is for the goods, not for the services. Then weightage for food is down from 47.58% to 45.86%. So in the current CPI, for the food consumption, it is 45.86%, and this is the highest for a commodity in CPI. So once again, the food's weightage has to be remembered while studying the CPI. Then the weightage for housing and clothing are higher. So what is down in food, that is being allocated to housing and clothing, because currently the percentage of expenditure spent by the people is decreasing in the food and it is increasing in housing and clothing because their overall per capita income is increasing. So this is a common economic trend and there is no speciality in that. That is why the allocation of food is decreasing and the allocation for housing and clothing is increasing in the CPI. Then there is a sharp downward reduction in the weightage for fuel from 9.49% to 6.84%. So due to environment and other concerns, the weightage on fuel is decreasing and it is from 9.49 to 6.84%. So this is the trendings of WPI and CPI. Then coming to next one, weightage of core industries in IIP. Friends, the index of industrial production, the IIP, is an indicator that measures the changes in the volume of production of industrial products during a given period. And this IIP's base year is 2011-12 once again. So for WPI, CPI and IIP, the base year is same. Then the Central Statistical Organization under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation compiles the index of industrial production. So even this is compiled by the CSO. Then IIP is published monthly, that is 6 weeks after the reference month ends. So it comes with a 6-week lag and it is published every month. So WPI every week, CPI every month, and this IIP once again every month. Then it calculates the data of 8 core sectors. So it calculates 8 core sectors, but mind you friends, it will not calculate only these 8 core sectors. Along with 8 core sectors, it also includes other non-core industries as well. So how many percent of this is assigned to core sectors and non-core sectors, we will see afterwards. But currently we will see what are those core sectors. That is the coal. Its total weightage is 10.33% in the core sector. So among the core sector, that is if you consider this core sector as 100 basis points, so in that this is 10.33. So in this core sector, this is 10.33. Then crude, its total weightage is 8.9% in the core sector. So once again within this core sector it is 8.98. Then natural gas, its total weightage is 6.88 in the core sector. So once again within the core sector it is 6.88. Then refinery products, its total weightage is 28.04%. So the highest one in the core sector. Then steel, it is having 17.92%, which can be said as the third highest. And electricity, the 19.85%, the second highest. Then cement having 5.37% is the second lowest, and the fertilizers, which is having 2.63%, is the least. So these fertilizers and then the refinery products, these two have to be remembered for being the highest and lowest. So this is the core sectors distribution in the IIP. Then coming to more facts, the 8 core sectors comprise 40.27% of weight of the items included in the index of industrial production. Yes friends, remaining 59.3% it is allocated to non-core industries, and this IIP calculates only 40.27% of the core industries. So whatever we discussed in the last slide regarding the core industries, this is all just 40.27% of the IIP. Then coming to the sector wise distribution, friends, in the IIP, as the 2011 and 12 base year, the mining consists of 14.373% of weightage, and manufacturing sector, it consists of 77.63% of weightage, and electricity 7.994%. So here it is all about manufacturing sector, and service sector is not included at all. So friends, industry is basically the primary and secondary, and tertiary is not so important here. Then coming to the primary and secondary importance, the primary goods, it is consisted of 34% weightage, that is the mining, agri products, etc. Then intermediate goods, that is basically the value addition or the manufacturing goods, it consists of 17.22%. Then capital goods, production of capital machineries, the lathe machines and other gadgets, it includes 8.22%. Then infrastructure or construction goods, that is the building materials, etc., it is being allocated 12%. And then the consumer durables, that is 12.84%. Then consumer non-durables, that is the wear and tear goods, it is 15.33%. So here primary goods have to be remembered, and then the least one, that is the capital goods, have to be remembered. So these are some of the facts regarding the IIP. Then coming to the next one, that is the different types of bank accounts. Friends, bank accounts, bank balance sheets, RBI's balance sheets are being usually asked by UPSC in one or the other form. That is why it becomes important. Now coming to first one, the savings account. Friends, everyone will be having a savings account, so there will be not so difficulty in understanding this. The bank pays interest for opening this type of account with them. So whenever you keep a deposit in the savings account, interest will be paid. Though it is less, some interest will be paid for sure. Then there is no limit in the number of deposits, but there is restriction on the withdrawal. Yes, we can deposit the money however we want, but withdrawal will be having certain amount of 20,000 per day in the ATMs and in the bank challans, etc. Then there is no minimum balance that needs to be maintained for this type of an account. Earlier there was a restriction on minimum balance, but on the oncoming of Jan Dhan Yojana, the minimum balance has been removed. Then the savings bank account is further divided into two types, that is the basic savings bank deposit account, and the other one is basic savings bank deposit accounts small scheme. So whenever you are going to have a startups or the small schemes or the cooperative accounts, etc., so that will be coming under this small scheme account. Other individual accounts will be coming under the normal BSBDA account. Then coming to next one, current account. Here no restrictions on number of deposits or withdrawal from such account. So anytime you can withdraw, anytime you can deposit into it. Then overdraft facility is available for the current bank accounts. So here in the current account, you can draw over than what is there in your account, and then you will have to replace it within the given time. If not, interest will be levied. Then there is no interest that is paid on such accounts. So whenever you keep some amount in the current account, no interest will be paid, and basically this is not a deposit account, it is a running account. So here transactions will be taking place on and off. Recurring deposit account. Friends, when the name recurring deposit account is said, we will remember that this savings and current accounts, these are the demand deposit accounts. These are demand deposit accounts because we can withdraw money whenever we have a demand, so there is no restrictions. But how this recurring deposit is different from a demand deposit, we will see. Here the account holder needs to deposit a fixed amount every month until it reaches a fixed maturity date. So here every month you will deposit 50 rupees, 100 rupees, so that by the end of 5 or 6 years you will withdraw some certain lump sum amount. Then any individual or an institution can open a recurring deposit account either separately or jointly. So here either individual or an institution, they can open this recurring deposit account. Then the interest is paid for the amount. Yes friends, the interest is paid for your deposits. Otherwise you will not be having the incentive to deposit your money every month. Then premature withdrawal of the amount is permitted, but provided a sum of amount is deducted as penalty. So if you withdraw the money before the maturity date, some penalty is levied. So hence here this is not a demand deposit because you cannot withdraw money when and where you want. You can only withdraw only after the maturity date. So this is the difference between demand deposit account and the recurring deposit account. Then coming to more types of accounts, fixed deposit account. Friends, it is a one-time deposit and one-time takeaway account. So here you have the opportunity to deposit only once and you have the opportunity to take away only once. So here there is no on and off transactions. Then banks pay interest on the fixed deposit account, and here the interest will be the highest compared to all other accounts. Then the rate of interest depends upon the amount you deposit and also for the time duration of the fixed deposit. So based on the amount and time, the interest paid will be depending. Then the full repayment of the amount is available before the maturity date of the fixed deposit. Yes friends, even in the premature date you can take away this. So up to that date, whatever interest that is paid, that will be redempted to you. So here, unlike the recurring deposit, there will be no penalties levied. Then Demat account, it can be opened only in the National Securities Depository Limited and the Central Depository Services Limited. So only two firms are available for opening a Demat account, and it is basically a dematerialized account, and it is used for trading of bonds and shares in the stock market. Then KYC is required for opening the Demat account. So this know your customer norms, this has to be fulfilled for opening a Demat account. So both the institutions, they have their own KYC norms that has to be fulfilled. Maybe endorsement from another nominee, or maybe keeping fixed deposits. So other things have to be taken up. Then the transactions cost is deducted. So whenever you trade with the bonds or shares, the transaction cost is deducted from your Demat account. Then next comes the NRI account. First one, the NRO, the non-resident ordinary rupees account. So this is a fixed deposit or a recurring deposit or current and savings account, but this is opened by an NRI. So only the difference is that here the account holder is an NRI. Then NRE account, that is the non-resident external rupees account. Here the money exchange takes place whenever you deposit and withdraw from the account. Then this account can be jointly opened with an Indian resident. So along with the Indian resident, you can open it jointly. It need not be an individual account. Then FCNR account, or the foreign currency non-resident account, it can only be in the form of term deposit and can be withdrawn after the maturity period only. So this is something like a fixed deposit. So here the on and off transactions are not available. But however, amount can be deposited in this account in the form of external currencies. Yes friends, now the difference between NRE account and FCNR account is that NRE account may be a current or a savings account. FCNR account is a term deposit account. And most importantly, this NRE account, it allows for withdrawal of money at any number of times for the NRI who is residing abroad. So he can withdraw the money anytime, and when he withdraws, the currency will go in rupees, not in the hard currency, and he will have to exchange it in the exchange market. But however, in the foreign currency non-resident account, when he withdraws, it goes with the foreign currency itself. So these are the differences between the NRO, NRE and FCNR account. Now come to the next one, assets and liabilities of RBI. Yes friends, in many forms UPSC will ask the assets and liabilities of various banks. That is why it becomes important. Now coming to the assets, the balances of notes and coins with the RBI. So what are those paper currencies and the coins that are present in the exchequer of the RBI? Those are the assets. Then gold coin and bullion. Yes friends, in the earlier days, whenever a currency has to be printed, then some gold has to be deposited. So all these golds which are deposited, now they have cumulatively amounted to some several metric tons. So all these golds, these are the assets of the RBI. Then the bills purchased and discounted. Yes friends, when the treasury bills, these are being purchased by RBI, so all these are purchased from the RBI's own amount. So once again, they become the asset. And those loans that are discounted, that is the banks, they have taken loans from the RBI and they have not yet paid. So those are present as a discounted bonds. So they will pay back the loan along with the interest. Once again, those bills that are discounted, those also become the assets of RBI. Yes friends, here at what interest rate they will pay? They will pay at the repo rate. Then the foreign currency assets. So friends, those hard currencies like the dollars, sterling pounds, etc., which are present in the RBI's exchequer, those are also the assets of RBI. Then investments in domestic securities. So in the domestic stock exchange, wherever RBI has invested, so all those things are assets. Then loans and advances. So other loans and advances given to major banks, major commercial entities and even the government, they become the assets of RBI. Now friends, in the RBI there are two departments, that is the banking department and the issue department. So these two, they have separate transactions and those are accounted separately. So even in the issue department there are gold and bullion. So here the gold and bullion means this is as a backing of note issue. Yes friends, even today whenever a currency is printed, not so much of gold is deposited, but some amount of gold has to be deposited. So all those gold which are deposited as a backup for the note issue, so these fall under this issue department's asset. So those which are deposited in the earlier times, those fall under the banking department's assets. So this is the difference. Then investment in foreign securities and investment in domestic securities. So even the issue departments, it will be having some savings. So even that it will invest in the foreign securities and in the domestic securities. Even that will be considered as overall assets of the RBI. Now coming to next, the liabilities. Friends, these are the categories of liabilities. That is the capital, that is paid up capital by the government. So government will pay some capital which the RBI has to repay after some time with interest. So it is a liability on RBI. Then reserve fund, some emergency reserve funds that are being established by government, that will be placed under RBI. So RBI has to repay it back, even that will become a liability. Then other reserves, so there will be several reserve funds, then several commercial entities, they will also be having some reserves within the RBI. So even those reserves, all these become the liabilities. So friends, funds and reserve funds, these are the deposits, and ultimately the deposits are the liabilities. So there is no confusion here, it is very straight. Then deposits held by government, banks and other financial institutions in the RBI. Yes, overall the deposits may be recurring deposit, fixed deposits or even any other reserves that are deposited, they become the liability of RBI. Then other liabilities and provisions. So here other liabilities means the contingency fund, that is emergency fund, the government places with the RBI. Then asset development fund, so some fund will be placed under RBI which can be used for asset development in the nation. So that will also come under the liability of RBI. Then there will be currency and gold revaluation account and investment revaluation accounts, and then the foreign exchange forward contracts valuation account. So friends, these valuation accounts, these are basically those accounts which account for the gains and losses in the change in the gold prices, in the change in the investment stocks and change in the foreign exchange currencies. So friends, for example, if there is some hard currency with the RBI, whenever this RBI sells this hard currency, it might incur either gain or loss due to change in the exchange rate on a day-to-day basis. So that can be accounted with this foreign exchange forward contracts valuation account. So some stocks are present with the RBI. So when this RBI sells the stock, some gain or loss can occur. So that will be accounted under this revaluation account of investment. Then whenever RBI sells the gold, even then the gain or loss can occur. That will be accounted under this gold revaluation account. Yes friends, now why the gain or loss, both of them are accounted under liabilities? This was due to avoiding complexities. But however, after 2019, the gains are accounted as the income of RBI and they are regarded as assets, and the losses, they are regarded as the liabilities. So in the year 2019, the change has been brought in and we will update accordingly. Then come to next, the liabilities of the issue department, that is currency in circulation. So currency that is in circulation in the economy, that becomes the liability of the RBI. Friends, why currency in circulation? That should become a liability of RBI. Friends, historically, whenever a paper currency is circulated in the economy, it is akin that some amount of gold that belongs to the public will be deposited in the RBI. So now, whenever the gold is present in the RBI's vault, then that gold will be a liability, or in other words, that paper currency will be a liability. So whenever that paper currency is brought back by the people and whenever it is paid back, then RBI has the liability to give back this gold. So this paper currency, it has been a slip or acknowledgement given by the RBI for the gold that is deposited. So now when the acknowledgement comes back, we have to give back the gold. So from that age, from that times to this time, this currency in circulation has become the liability of the RBI. And even for any other banks, the currency in circulation will become the liability. But for other banks, those currencies which are circulating within their clientele base will be the liability. But for RBI, almost all the currency that is in circulation within the economy will become a liability. I hope you have understood. Now 3 points that are to be remembered, that is the bills purchased and the bills discounted, they become the assets of RBI. One tricky thing, and then these reserve funds, they have been updated. So the loss due to revaluation will be under the liabilities, the gain under revaluation will be under the assets. Then this currency in circulation will be under liability, it will not be under asset. So these are the liabilities and assets of RBI. Then come to next one, different types of money. Friends, here we have M1, M2, M3 and M4. There are some broad money, there are some narrow money. So we will discuss what are they. M1 includes currency with the public and demand deposit in all banks. Example, current and savings account. We have spoken of demand deposit, that is the current and savings account, while speaking the current and savings account part. Then other deposits with the RBI, which can be withdrawn whenever there is a demand. So these are the on-demand liquid currencies. So these are like the hard cashes which can be spent anytime. So that is why these are the primary money, that is M1. But however, M1 excludes India's deposits with IMF, World Bank, then foreign government, etc. Friends, here deposits means it can be the deposit of an individual, it can be deposit of a company, or it can even be deposit of the government of India. So they should be in the domestic banks if they have to be withdrawn whenever we want. But however, when government of India deposits some amount with the IMF, World Bank and foreign governments, we cannot withdraw them whenever we want. And moreover, whenever we withdraw, the same amount will not come. The amount will vary based on the exchange rate. So these cannot be taken as the hard cashes and they cannot be M1. Then interbank deposits. So one bank depositing money in other bank, this cannot be the liquid cash because the bank is not an individual. Bank will not spend money on its will and wish. So that is why the bank's deposit and the government of India's deposit in foreign accounts, so these cannot be the M1. These cannot be the liquid cash. Basically friends, M1 is one which we can spend in whenever we want, wherever we want. Then M2. M2 means M1 plus post office bank savings. So friends, not only banks, even post offices, they will also carry some accounts. So there will be post office accounts just like the bank accounts. So all those money that are deposited within the post offices, they belong to M2. So M2 means bank plus post office accounts. So why these post office accounts? They are presented with M2 friends because earlier times this is not so easy to withdraw money from the post office just like in the banks. So there is little delay when we withdraw money from the post office than when we withdraw money from the banks. So that is why these post office bank savings, they are placed under separate category. So here only the post office's savings accounts, not those recurring deposits and time deposits, those are not included here. Yes friends, even to withdraw the money from the savings post office account, there was some delay, that is why it is M2. Then coming to M3 or the broader money. Friends, when we speak of narrow to broader money, then the time deposits will come into picture. So 1 week time, 1 month time, so these things doesn't matter when we speak of broad money. So now this M3 is also called as money aggregate and it consists of M1, that is money with the bank deposits, and the time deposits with the commercial banks, that is the fixed deposits, recurring deposits. So all these things, they become the broad money, M3. So M3 is the broader money that is fixed for the banks. So now those time deposits and recurrent deposits of post offices are not included in this M3. Now coming to next, M4. M4 means M3 plus total post office deposits. So now the post offices recurring and time deposits are included. So now M4 means the hard cash within us, then the savings deposit in the post offices, then time deposits in the bank, and then time deposits in the post offices. So now all these things, they constitute M4, and this is the overall money that is under circulation or that is used in the economy. Now coming to the ranking, friends, M1 and M2, they are the narrow money. So because not everyone will be having hard cashes, everyone will try to invest in one or the other schemes so that they will earn profits. So these M1 and M2, which are the hard cashes, they are called the narrow money. But M3 and M4, which include the time deposits and recurring deposits, so these are used for savings and these are called the broad money. Then this M1 has the highest liquidity, we know that because they are hard cashes, and M2, they have the liquid cashes or the bank balance and also the post office balance. So this post office balance, even though it comes with some delay, but it comes. That is why it has liquidity but considerably less than the M1. Then M3 has the time deposits, hence it is not so liquid compared to M2. Then M4, it is the least liquid amount because all the time and recurring deposits are accounted here. So this is all about the M1, M2, M3, M4. Do not confuse, understand. Now come to the next one, the trends of trade and fiscal deficit. Friends, fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, then primary deficits, these will be often in news, and how their trends will be going on, that will be asked by UPSC. Friends, in these questions, even though the guesswork can go correct, but we have to take care of the extremities. There will be some data which are already extreme, and when they are correct, we have to put them correct as well. For example, forex reserves, they have increased enormously after 1991 reforms. Yes, enormously is correct there. It is not an extremity. So likewise, if we take care of the extremities, then we will be having great confidence even to hit the guessworks. So that is why I have brought some of the things. Here we will look at only where there are extremities. Now coming to the fiscal deficit and revenue deficits from 1980 to 1991. Friends, coming to the fiscal deficit, so it started with 5 and then went to 4, then went to 6, then went to 8. So this 8 is the highest, that is in the 1986-87, and then it once again starts reducing. And the same way, even the revenue. So it starts with 1, it reduces to 0, and then comes once again to 2, and then to 3 sometimes. And then primary deposit, this starts with 3, then comes to 4, and then 5, and then to 4 and to 3 once again. So it starts with moderate, then goes a dip, then moves to the height, and then moderates. So this is the peak for 1980 to 1990. So this one has to be remembered. Then come to next, 1990 to 2000. So here friends, it starts from 7%, but suddenly it dips to 5, and then rises up to 6, and then to 5, then 4, then 5, etc. So this 7 to 5 has to be taken care of, but however later it is just a moderate amount. So here in primary deficit, just like the fiscal deficit, there will be a dip, and then it moderates. So all the deficits, they are going on the same pace, so there will be no change of phase, but only here there will be change of phase. But such minute things will not be asked by UPSC, don't worry about that. Then coming to next trend, that is 2000 to 2015-16. It started with 5, basically moderate, then went to 4, then went to 3. So gross fiscal deficit is reducing, and it is least in 2007-8. So it was 2.54 in 2007-8. Then once again it rose up suddenly to 5, 6, 7, and then it has moderated to 3.95 as per the 2015-16 data. So here, even in this statistics, we can see the slowing down of fiscal deficit, and it is reaching to the least, that is to 2.54, but however rising once again, but then a roller coaster path, that is the ups and downs are common. So here friends, whenever extremity is given like steadily etc., it is not applicable for revenue deficit, fiscal deficit and primary deficits, because there are ups and downs, and then enormously cannot be applicable, unlike some extremities where we have spoken. And when coming to primary deficits, we have some 2 to 3 places where the primary deficits goes to negative. So friends, primary deficit going to negative means there will be no need of India paying the interest, or in other words, in the interest part of the account, we are getting interest rather than we have to pay. So that is the indication of negative primary deficit. So that point also we will take into consideration. Lest the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit and primary deficit, they are all in phase. So when one moves, all others will move accordingly. So this is all about the trends in fiscal deficit and the primary and revenue deficits. Then come to next, data on imports. Friends, basically in the last decade, the imports, it was going in a moderate phase, but however in the 2018-19, the imports peaked, then it has moderated in the 2021. So currently we have imports up to a value of 35 trillion. We have reached the 44 trillion rupees, but then we have moderated to 35 trillion in the last decade. But coming to the long term, that is starting from the 1960, there was a very sluggish rise in the imports. Until 2000, the imports, it barely rose to a great extent. But however, after 2000, there was a great rise in the imports bill, and it rose to around 580 billion US dollars. And then in 2019 or 18 or so, it approached up to 620 US billion dollars, and now it is coming down. The same way, the imports to the percentage of GDP also, it was not so good till 2000, but however after 2000 it rose, and it rose to 30%, and now it has reduced to somewhere around 20%. So this part of sudden rise will become important, and this part of sluggish growth will also become important as far as the imports are concerned. Now coming to the countries. Friends, as of 2020, China is the country where we have the largest imports. So friends, here don't confuse with the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Even though we have banned several apps, but still China stands to be the country wherein India's imports are maximum. And then comes US, and then United Arab Emirates, basically the petrol, then Saudi Arabia, then Iraq, then Hong Kong, Switzerland, Indonesia, Singapore, they stand in line. So China and US, this has to be taken care in the imports. Then come to next one. Friends, the data on imports. India's import purchases during 2020 are, friends, that is the mineral fuels. This accounted for 28.4%. That is the highest one. So minerals, they form the highest in the imports bill. And then electrical machinery and equipment, they form 11.7%, and gems and jewelry, they form 11.2%. Friends, this electrical and gems, they will be interchanging because of steep competition. Then machinery including computers, that is 9.6%, then organic chemicals 4.9%, plastics and plastic articles 3.3%, then animal or vegetable fats and oils and waxes 2.9%, so likewise it goes. Then fertilizers, that is the 10th highest, that is the 2%. There are other imports below this, but fertilizers will take as a benchmark. So this fuel oil and the competition between electrical machinery and gems and jewelers, that we will stress and we will remember. Then coming to more facts, India's top 10 imports accounted for almost 4/5 of the overall value of its products purchased from other countries. Yes, friends, these top 10 imports, these form the 78.1% of the imports. Or in other words, we can also say that the top 10 countries, that is from China to Hong Kong, they also formed the majority of the imports that we imported. Then imported animal or vegetable fats and oils and waxes posted a sole increase in the value among India's top 10 import categories, up to 7.8% from 2019 to 2020. So in this year, only this commodity, that is vegetable fats, oils and waxes, those imports increased. Other all imports decreased compared to 2018-19. So this fact has to be remembered. Then leading the declining product categories were iron and steel down by 36%, then mineral fuels including oil down by 31%, and gems and precious metals down by 30.3%. So all the major imports, that is the fuels, then iron and steel and gems, they have reduced, and only vegetable oils and fats, their imports have increased compared to the 2018-19. So this fact we will remember. Come to next one, data on exports. Friends, just like the imports, we didn't have so much of exports till 2000. So the statistics of exports, it resembles that of imports here, but after 2000 we see a sudden rise. And then by 2018-19, our exports, it rises up to 580 billion US dollars. So this fact we will remember, and then it is coming down after 2020. Then the same is the case with the exports with the percentage of GDP. So it has not been raised till 2000, and then it rose, and then it is coming down. But however, the slope is not so steep when it comes to exports with respect to the percentage of GDP. So it is gradually moving, but here it is moving suddenly. Then coming to the distribution of exports, friends, from 1985 to 2009, manufacturing goods, these are the major parts of exports we have done so far. So they started with a 50.1% in 1985, and they have still increased to 64.6%. And then the agricultural products, they have been reducing. It was 24.6% in 1985, and we have reduced to 7.3%. And then other sectors are also increasing, that is from 25 to 28%. So other sectors means here service sectors can also be included. So here this increase in manufacturing and then decreasing agriculture has to be taken care of. Then come to next, the distribution of exports. Friends, United States, this is the major country where we have exported the highest. And then United Arab Emirates, it falls the next one. Then China, then Hong Kong, then Singapore. So these are the countries wherein we have exported in March 2020. So this is as per the March 2020 data. Then coming to the products. Yeah, friends, mineral products, they form the highest exports, and then the refined petroleum. So these form the second highest. Then automobiles, they form the third highest. Then machinery and mechanical appliance, basically the capital goods, those are the fourth highest exports. And then organic chemicals, those are the fifth highest exports. Yes, friends. So basically the petroleum and petroleum products and mineral products, those are the highest exports in India. Then come to the next one, data on remittances. Friends, we know that remittances are the major sources for income in India, and in that context we study the trends of the remittances. Friends, here we have a data from 2012, basically the last decade. The remittances were not so good before 2012, but however it started rising after 2012, and then it rose to a sub peak in 2014, and then it rose to a new peak in 2019, and then it is reducing slowly. So this peak has to be remembered, that is in the 2019 approximately. Then coming to the distribution of the remittances, UAE forms the highest in remittances. So the highest remittances we get is from the citizens of India who are residing in UAE. And then the US. So NRIs in US and also the Indian citizens in US, they are the second highest remitters. Then Saudi Arabia forms the third highest remitter, then Qatar the fourth, then Kuwait, Oman, UK, Malaysia, Canada, and then Philippines 0.03, and other miscellaneous nations, they form 14.8. So this UAE, US and Saudi Arabia, this we will remember. Then come to next, some of the states who are largely gaining by these remittances. Yes, friends, here Kerala is the highest gaining state by the remittances, and then comes Maharashtra, and then miscellaneous. All others they come the third. But however, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu they come the fourth, and Rajasthan is having 1.2%. So here Kerala and Maharashtra will be remembered specifically. Then come to next, India's ranking in remittances. Friends, for longer time, India maintains the first rank in the value of remittances. So here, with the score of 83.1, India ranks the first in the remittances, and then comes China with 59.5 score, and then Mexico with a 42.9 score, and then Philippines, Egypt, etc. So all other nations they fall back. India, China and Mexico are remembered as for the rank of remittances are concerned in the world. So these are a few data regarding the remittances. Then come to next, the trends in FDI and FPI. Friends, FDI is being easing day by day in India, and there are several sectors that are being eased. And here is a list of those sectors that are eased. Agriculture and animal husbandry, so 100% automatic route, and then mining sector, again 100% automatic route. So friends, mining sector becomes important because of coal and others. So even the coal, even in that sector, 100% FDI in the automatic route is allowed. Then petroleum and natural gas exploration sector 100% allowed, but however refining sector only 49% is allowed. Then defense manufacturing, this will always be in use, so that is why it becomes important. So here also 100% FDI is allowed, but only 74% is allowed under automatic route. Above 74% you have to take the permission. Then broadcasting 100%. Then broadcasting content services, so some contents patents if you are broadcasting, in those only 49% are allowed. So to maintain confidentiality, this 49% is fixed. Then print media 26% is allowed. Then civil aviation, coming to airports 100%, but however coming to air transport services, that is flights, that is also 100%, but however up to 49% automatic route, but above 49% government permission has to be taken up. Then coming to more facts, telecom services 100% is allowed, that is up to 49% under the automatic route. Above that government's permission has to be taken up. So friends, in the wake of 2G spectrum scam and in the wake of 5G distribution, telecom services will become important. You have to remember this. Then e-commerce, friends, national policy on e-commerce that made some news, that is why it becomes important. As far as e-commerce is concerned, 100% FDI is allowed. And then coming to malls and shops, the single brand retail trading, here 100% is allowed, but however 49% under the automatic route. Above 49% government's permission has to be taken up. And then multi-brand retail trading, so this multi-brand, that is one shop, it is trading almost all the brands like the Reliance Mart, Vishal Mart, etc. So those only 51% FDI is allowed, that too under the government's permission. Then railway infrastructure 100% is allowed. Then asset reconstruction companies, there also 100% is allowed. And then banking in the private sector only 75% is allowed. And here also there are restrictions, that is up to 49% it is automatic, but 49 to 74% government's approval has to be taken up. So there are more restrictions for the private sector banking in the foreign investment. Then insurance sector 100% is allowed. Pension sector 49% is allowed in order to protect the pension funds of Indians. Then pharmaceuticals, as far as the green field is concerned, 100% it is allowed, but however the brown fields 100% is allowed, but up to 74% it is automatic route. Above 74% government's approval has to be taken. And then food processing industries, there 100% is allowed. So in the wake of Sampada scheme and the mega food parks, this food processing foreign direct investment will become important. So these are some of the FDI restrictions. I hope you can remember at least 5 to 6 of them. Then come to next, the trends. Friends, the highest foreign direct investment as of March 2021, it came from Mauritius, and the second from Singapore, and the third from USA, and then from Netherlands, Japan, UK, Germany, and then the Cayman Islands, it forms the last. Friends, we know that this Cayman Islands is also a tax haven, so that is why it becomes important. So this Mauritius, Singapore, USA and Cayman Islands, these are worth remembering in this figure. Then come to next, the distribution of FDI with respect to the sector. Friends, service sector, it formed the highest taker of foreign direct investment as of March 2021, and that was 16%. And then came the computer, software and hardware, that was 13%. And then telecommunication, it was 7%. Then trading is the 6%. Then construction development, that is township housing, etc., it formed 5%. And then automobile industries, construction, chemical, they formed in line. and all these chemical, drugs and hotel, they bagged 3% of foreign direct investments. So this is all about the foreign direct investments, and you can remember at least 2 to 3 facts, so you can take good guessworks in the exam hall. Then the trend of foreign direct investment in India. Friends, it is a very roller coaster path and there is no steady steep or fall here. So it is just like the ECG. So wherever steadily comes, straight away put it as wrong as far as foreign direct investment is concerned. But however, in the recent 2021, it reached a new peak. So this peak has to be remembered. So lest this peak, almost all the things are very unstable. So there are no chances for UPSC to ask a question in these areas. Then come to next, the states. Friends, Gujarat was the highest taker of foreign direct investment as of now, and then came the Maharashtra, and then came Karnataka and Delhi, and then Tamil Nadu, Jharkhand, Haryana, they fall in line after them. So this Gujarat, it gained 30%, and then Maharashtra 28%, and Karnataka was far below by 14%, and then Delhi 11%, and all others are single digit rankers. So these three states we have to remember. So this is all about the FDI. Then come to next, FPI. Friends, FPI is highly volatile. So the investments, they come and go every day. So day in and day out, the changes will take place. So there are no chances for UPSC in asking for the trends of FPI. But however, some facts are here. Friends, as far as the FPI is concerned, in the equity market, we bagged the highest, and in the stock exchange of the equity market, that is in the secondary equity market, we have the highest FPI, and then in the primary market of the equity shares, we have the second highest. And then when it comes to debt market, even there the secondary market, it bags a considerable amount of foreign institutional investment, that is up to 29.97 million US dollars. And then we have special debt and hybrid accounts, those are not so significant here. So this equity market, and that to the secondary equity market and the primary equity market, these have to be remembered as far as FPI. Then coming to more facts regarding the FPI. Friends, United States of America, it contributed to the highest foreign institutional investment in India, and then came Mauritius, and then came Singapore, and then Luxembourg. So all these, they fall in line. So USA, Mauritius and Singapore are worth remembering as far as the foreign portfolio investments or the foreign institutional investments are concerned. So these are some of the facts and data. Friends, go through the video 2 to 3 times so that you will be having good strategies for guessworks. So you need not by heart them, only the tips you have to take, that's it. Now come to the last part. Friends, many of you have been frustrated because of too much factual questions that are being asked by UPSC, and even we were frustrated to some extent. But friends, the reality is that these factual questions, they are not demanding our by-hearting capability. They are rather demanding our observational capability. They are demanding our judgmental capability. So while taking the guessworks, we will get to know how this observation and judgmental capability, they help in deciphering most of the factual questions. So tune your brain for this observation and judgment. And this observation and judgment is not only necessary for UPSC, friends, these are the lessons of life. So your observation, your judgment, they decide where you go in the future. So in the course of preparation of UPSC, we learn some great lessons of life. So never ever let it go. So learn it and inculcate it in your daily life. Do it. All the very best. Good luck, friends.